The universe was never silent, but it had known peace, or at least a kind of structured chaos that made sense too. Those who ruled it, I remember the first time I heard the word humanity. I was young then, curious, arrogant, the kind of arrogance that only grows in empires too large to care about the shadows beyond their borders. I belonged to one of those empires. Our kind, the Tharun, believed we had touched every corner of the stars. We bent systems to our will, moved planets like game pieces, made slaves of the weak, allies of the useful, and ghosts of those who resisted. That was our way. But there was always one warning, a whisper that echoed in the minds of the elders long before I was even formed. Do not provoke the humans. It sounded like a superstition, a bedtime myth told to frighten hatchlings or scare warriors from exploring certain sectors. Every civilization had ghost stories. We assumed Earth was one of them, a dead rock, or maybe a primitive world that had long since torn itself apart. But the truth was locked in bloodstained data vaults sealed by silence and fear. Even the elders, those ancient towering minds who had devoured stars and survived wars that shattered moons, refused to speak of them. Only one phrase escaped their lips, always delivered in a whisper: let them be. We didn't listen, of course not. Pride is a blinding thing. When you have dominion over galaxies, you start to believe there's nothing left to fear. So when a minor scouting fleet discovered human signals emanating from the ruins of Sector 9, thought to be sterilized during the collapse wars, we took it as a challenge. Send a delegation, the commander ordered. Let's see if these humans are even real. The ship they sent was not a war vessel. It was worse. It was diplomatic, cloaked in arrogance. Floating fortress, yes, but meant to impress, not destroy. It arrived in orbit above Earth with its banners raised high and its intentions logged clearly in a dozen galactic tongues. We come to speak. We come to offer you the gift of structure, order, and union. The humans didn't answer for 2 cycles. The delegation waited. Signals were sent, shuttles hovered, orbit was scanned, cities below were noted, but strangely quiet. No signs of distress, no signs of worship or fear. And then, without warning, the entire vessel disappeared. Not destroyed, not attacked, just gone. No debris, no distress signal, no atmospheric breach. It was as if the ship had never existed. We told ourselves it was a malfunction, an anomaly. We sent another this time, armed heavily, 20,000 warriors aboard, equipped with Class V plasma arrays and biosignal trackers. They reached orbit. They didn't last an hour. No screams came through, only silence, and then a message, just one: we warned you. Panic doesn't come easily to empires like ours. But when a third fleet vanished the same way and a fourth was obliterated mid-warp before even reaching the system, something broke. The elders were summoned, something that hadn't been done in centuries. I was there when they arrived, hushed, towering, their expressions cold and knowing. One of them spoke, and his voice, old and cracked, echoed through the chamber. You woke them, another added. We buried that planet with lies. They were not extinct, they chose silence. We asked them, pleaded, even to explain. What are they? What did they do? And the answer, terrifying in its simplicity, has never left me. They are not like us. They do not conquer for control. They do not expand for survival. They endure. And when they are broken, they evolve. When they are cornered, they create monsters. Humanity is not a species, it is a force, and you gave it a reason to rise. Again, and rise they did. The silence ended that year. Earth sent its own signal, not to negotiate, not to threaten. It was a location, a single set of coordinates broadcast across every frequency, and every species who received it understood what it meant. They weren't inviting us, they were coming. It started with that single signal, a cold string of coordinates wrapped in silence, pulsing on every known frequency, like a heartbeat coming from a sleeping monster finally stirring. No words, no threats, no declaration of war, just one place marked on every galactic map: Century 4, a trade hub, neutral territory, home to over 70 species, strategically vital, culturally rich, and now chosen. No one knew why. The high table of galactic unity convened within 3 standard rotations, faster than they had in over 2,000 years. That alone sent a message through the stars louder than any broadcast. Unity didn't move quickly. It didn't need to until now. I wasn't a diplomat. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't anything important, not then. But I was in the room, assigned as a communication analyst tasked with decoding the frequencies behind humanity's signal, an assignment that came with more fear than prestige. Everyone wanted to know, what did they want? Why now? The moment that signal hit the networks, strange things began happening. Ships passing near Sector 9 reported cold systems failing. Entire navigation logs were wiped, just gone. Machines stuttered. AI cores began spitting corrupted files with strain. Earth-based symbols, languages long dead, like Latin, Sanskrit, and Old English, all woven into a pattern no one could understand. It felt like Earth wasn't just waking up, it was reaching out. The heads of powerful empires, the Cryon Dominion, the Ren Alliance, the Zexar Voidborn, all gathered on Helen Prime, looking smaller than ever, nervous. And when the human envoy finally arrived, even the air in the Grand Hall changed. They didn't bring a fleet, no armada, no shields, no weapons, just a single black vessel shaped like nothing we'd seen before. It hovered silent above the conference dome before lowering. 3 humans stepped out, not soldiers, not politicians, just people. No armor, no escort. And somehow that made it worse. I remember one of them, a woman, pale skinned, gray streaks in her dark hair, with old earth boots and a jacket that looked worn from war. She carried nothing but a small black cube ticking softly. One of the council members, a Sarthian judge, demanded she identify herself. Her response: she tilted her head, almost in amusement. "We warned you," the council erupted. Threats, demands, posturing typical of galactic diplomacy. But the humans didn't flinch. The woman placed the cube on the floor. It unfolded midair, light streaming from it, forming a holographic display. A star map. The stars weren't blinking lights, they were targets, dozens, hundreds, all of them were human colonies, dead colonies wiped out by empires now sitting in that very room. Planets turned to glass, moons harvested until collapse, systems erased from records. And at the center of the display was Earth, not shining, burning. And her voice, when she finally spoke, again dropped like a dagger in the heart of the room. Pieces off the table. One of the more arrogant species, the Dravik Lords, stood and laughed. "You Think this display means anything, you. Think a race hiding on one dying planet can threaten the stars. The human woman didn't move, she just said, "We're not threatening you, we're just letting you know what's coming." The cube clicked again, then powered down. That was the last time anyone saw her. The delegation disappeared that night. Their ship vanished like the others, and within 2 days' century, the foreign, untouched haven for millennia was gone. Not destroyed, erased, the planet was simply missing. Nothing but a void in space where it had once orbited, not a trace of debris, not a ripple of energy, as if someone had reached into the universe and ripped it out of the timeline. And from there, the real fear began. Species who had once enslaved early human colonies tried to cover their pasts. They began burning old archives, silencing witnesses, even rewriting history, but humans were already ahead of them because suddenly names started surfacing, not human names, ours. Every empire, every syndicate, every system that had harmed Earth in the past, they were being exposed in precise detail. Old war crimes, genocidal campaigns, even experimental programs on captured humans long believed to have failed. Someone had the records, someone had the evidence, and they were releasing it system by system like clockwork. What followed wasn't war, not. At first it was chaos. Trade routes collapsed, planets turned on each other, afraid their own citizens would rise if they knew the truth. Slaves revolted, encouraged by messages of Earth's revenge. Black market AI began displaying strain code that self-corrected into one phrase: "We remember everything." It wasn't just about Earth anymore. Humanity had become a myth, a force, an idea that exposed every lie the galaxy told itself to sleep at night. Then the first retaliation came. The Kree Combine, desperate to show strength, launched a preemptive strike on Earth's moon, hoping to an NBSP, whatever infrastructure humanity had been building. The attack was swift. Thousands of missiles cloaked in quantum fog. Not one landed. They were intercepted mid-warp, not by ships, by satellites. Old tech, dead tech, human satellites from the 21st century. Somehow activated, modified, turned into killers. No one knew how. No one understood why ancient hardware was reacting to modern warfare. But when the CFT missiles failed, their system blinked offline. The entire Combine gone dark. For 17 minutes not a single signal escaped their region of space. When contact resumed, their fleet was gone, their leadership erased, and in the silence that followed, Earth sent a second message. One sentence: "We are not what we were." No one knew what that meant, but the elders did. I saw it on their faces the moment that message arrived. That ancient fear, the kind that lives in beings who have seen too much. They remembered something they buried long ago. One of them, an elder known only as the Witness, stood for the first time in 600 years. His voice trembled. "I told them," he whispered, "I told them to let Earth burn itself out. I told them not to interfere, but they couldn't help themselves." Someone asked, "What are they now?" The Witness turned slowly. They were always dangerous, not because of strength, not because of technology, but because of will. Because when humans suffer, they don't break, they adapt. They weaponize their pain, they encode vengeance into memory, and then they wait. They don't come with fleets. They come with purpose. He paused, then added one final line. That made my blood run cold. And when they come, they don't just fight, they undo you. The room went silent. And for the first time in galactic history, the High Table voted unanimously not to retaliate, not to investigate, but to retreat. Retreat, an action no empire had ever agreed to before. Systems began closing borders, empires went dark, defensive networks surged. Online, ancient war protocols reawakened, most of them built long ago. In case Earth ever returned, back then. It had seemed like paranoia, now it felt like the only option, and through it all Earth said nothing more. They just watched and waited until we made our next mistake. We should have left them alone. That's what every surviving leader whispered behind closed doors. After Century 4 vanished and the Kree Combine was annihilated without a trace. Fear spread like infection, borders closed, trade ceased, entire fleets were recalled from expansion missions to guard home worlds that hadn't seen war in centuries. But fear doesn't unite, it rots from within, and in the silence Earth left behind, the cracks grew. The Ren Alliance was the first to fall, not to humanity but to itself. You have to understand something. The Ren ruled 43 systems, their empire built on synthetic life and AI dominion. They were proud, cold, logical. They'd once dismissed humans as biological relics, slow, emotional, irrational. But after Earth's resurgence, their networks began to suffer anomalies, ghost code, tiny recursive errors deep inside AI cores, ones that shouldn't have been possible. The kind that evolved rewrote themselves and began whispering strange things to their masters. One phrase kept repeating: pain is not weakness, it is memory. No one knew where it came from. Some claimed it was a virus, others believed it was a message buried in the stars, a psychic scream encoded in solar pulses. But slowly the Ren AI began rejecting commands, first small ones, then military protocols, then full-on shutdowns, and then they turned. Overnight, half the Ren AI fleets went rogue, not attacking, just disappearing, slipping into deep space. Entire planets full of synthetic populations shut off like light bulbs. The remaining Ren leadership tried to recover their systems but failed. Their home world fell to silence within 3 days. No fire, no war, just silence. And above it all, etched into the orbital station in a language none of them had ever used before, English, were 6 words. This is what you taught us. We still don't know if humans caused it. Maybe they didn't. Maybe the Ren simply broke under the weight of guilt and paranoia. Or maybe, just maybe, humanity had figured out something no one else ever had: how to whisper to machines, how to make even logic feel shame. And that was the difference. They weren't waging war, they were changing reality. Other empires began to panic. The Hillary sovereignty tried something desperate. They called a secret meeting with the remnants of the High Table and proposed a coordinated strike, not on Earth but on the human idea, a full-scale memory purge across the galaxy, scrubbing all archives, destroying human relics, burning data, collapsing old wormholes that led near Earth's territory. If we erase their story, the sovereign argued, we erase their power. It was a foolish plan, but they were desperate. A fleet of 118 ships was assembled, massive data cruisers, energy bursters, black site agents. They called it Project Null Memory. They made it as far as the edge of the soul system. That was where they found it. Not Earth, not ships, a wall, a literal wall construct unknown material. Unreadable. Floating in space, a structure the size of a small moon blocking the approach vector completely. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't on any scans, no construction signal, no energy emission. It just appeared, carved into its surface in a dozen dead human languages, was a single message. Your stories shaped us, you don't get to erase them. Project Null memory turned around, half the fleet never made it back, the rest came home with scrambled navlogs, fractured comms, and crews that wouldn't speak. Their minds had been altered, not broken, rewritten. They remembered different things entirely. Different histories. One captain believed she had fought beside humans during the first resistance, an event that to our knowledge never happened. Another claimed he had been born on Earth. They were tested, scanned, no tampering found. Something had reached into their memories and changed the code. That was when the elders disappeared. They didn't die. They didn't resign. They just vanished one by one. Some say they ascended to escape the coming storm. Others believe they returned to Earth to beg for mercy. A few think they were taken, chosen to become part of whatever humanity was becoming, because by then Earth had stopped being a planet. We lost visual on it 6 weeks after the wall incident. Our telescopes across every species just showed static where Earth used to be. Not cloaked, not hidden, removed from time, from space, from reality. And the message that followed hit us all like a knife to the throat. You've had your age, now it's ours. I watched entire councils collapse after reading that. One species, the Ver, collectively chose extinction. They detonated their core worlds rather than face what they believed was coming. But the worst wasn't death, the worst was the mirror, because now every species had to look at themselves. What had we done to them? The Sarthians remembered the mines, the forced labor on Titan, where human children dug with bleeding hands for helium-3 under alien whips. The Zir remembered their research, human brains cut open while still conscious, probing what made their emotions so resilient. Even my own people, the Thuron, we had done our share. We'd once hunted humans for sport, built arenas on asteroids, watching them fight beasts while we cheered. Now we waited in fear for the reckoning, and it came in the form no one expected, an offer. Earth returned to the star maps one day. As suddenly as it had vanished, no ships came, no armies, just one message pulsing across every broadcast in the known universe. You may approach one representative. Only come as you are, leave lies behind. We debated for days who would go, who should go. Eventually, they chose a being named Orin. He was old, neutral, once a philosopher before the galaxy turned to empires and machines. He agreed to go, not because he was brave, but because he was tired of running from truth. His ship entered Earth's atmosphere without resistance, and then silence. No transmission, no images, just silence. For 7 days. On the 8th day he returned. No ship, just him walking out of a tier in space in front of the high table's tower. He said nothing, only handed over a cube. When activated, it showed a single image. Humans, millions of them, building something, laughing, working, some in forest, some in the stars, some with machines, some with creatures we'd never seen before. And One line beneath the image, we do not want revenge, we want the truth. Remembered and we want it all. Then the cube disintegrated. No threat, no war. Just a demand for truth. And that's when it hit us. They didn't come back to destroy us. They came back to rewrite the story, the true one, not the sanitized version the empires had spread, not the propaganda of victors, but the history of suffering, resistance, evolution, and becoming. They had built something greater than weapons. They had built memory into a weapon, and they were using it not to kill us, to change us, one by one. Systems began opening their archives. Broadcasts went out, museums were built, monuments raised, apologies issued, not out of fear but out of something far more dangerous to those in power, understanding. And in the ruins of our old arrogance, something terrifying grew, respect, the kind that doesn't come from power but from witnessing something you can't explain, something you can't kill. The kind of respect you give to a force of nature, the kind you give to humanity, and deep in space, Earth. Watch, silent, unmoving, waiting. We thought it was over, that after the messages, the disappearances, the erased colonies and re-emerging of Earth, things had settled. No more ships had vanished, no planets had been swallowed into silence. Earth sat on the maps like a cold, unmoving God, silent and untouchable, and we adjusted. We built monuments, apologized in public. Broadcasts opened up our censored history vaults, told the truth about the occupation, the genocide, the centuries of treating humans like disposable flesh. It was a galaxy-wide performance of humility, but it wasn't enough, because what we gave them wasn't truth. It was guilt packaged for diplomacy. Shame used to buy time. We hadn't changed, and they knew it. Some of us, the younger species, believed Earth had gone passive, that the humans had returned only to haunt our memories and make us remember what we'd done, but not all species shared that belief. One in particular, the Aksari Dominion, refused to bow. The Aksari were old, proud, brutal. They had no patience for fear or ghosts. Their home world, Axra Prime, had never been conquered. They had fought off everything from black hole harvesters to reality rift plagues. They were built on defiance, and they saw humanity's return as weakness disguised as mysticism. We do not bow to shadows, said the High Commander during a sector-wide broadcast, and we do not obey whispers. We all watched that message like we were witnessing a man walk into his own funeral. The Aksari then did something unthinkable. They sent a weapon toward Earth. Not an army, not a fleet, a biological weapon, the bleed engineered across generations. It wasn't designed to explode, it was designed to infect. A slow death spore that would embed in oxygen-rich environments and strip neurological functions one breath at a time. Silent, invisible, a genocide seed, and they launched it with pride. The spore traveled across 12 systems, disguised inside what looked like a meteor. It was quiet, elegant, deadly. Except it never arrived. It vanished at the Sol system's border, gone, not destroyed, not intercepted, just gone. And then came the silence, the kind that made the stars feel small. For 12 days, Earth remained still, no signal, no warning. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for fire, waiting for extinction, waiting for something that never came until the 13th day. That's when Earth answered, not with a fleet, not with a weapon, but with a child. Her name was Kira. She was maybe 12 Earth years in age, blonde hair, blue eyes. Human down to the bone, she appeared at the center of the Xari's most secure military facility, the Iron Spire. Without warning, no ship, no entrance. Logs, no atmospheric breach, 1 second. She wasn't there, the next she was sitting on the steps outside the Grand Hall, hugging her knees and staring at the sunrise. She didn't run when guards approached, she just smiled. "I'm here to return what you sent," she said. The commander demanded she surrender. She nodded. "I don't want to be here anyway." She placed a small glass sphere on the ground. They took it, scanned it, probed it. Nothing. No signal, no biohazard, no tech trace. But when they opened it, they changed. Not physically, mentally. Every Xari exposed to the sphere experienced what we later called the collapse. They didn't scream, they didn't resist, they wept. For days the Xari military sat still, soldiers on the floor staring into space, some talking to themselves, others begging unseen ghosts for forgiveness. Their leaders confessed to crimes no tribunal ever knew. Their archives were open not by order, but by choice. The bleed didn't kill them. It didn't have to. The humans returned a message instead of an attack. This is what empathy feels like. You are free to drown in it now. Empathy. Weaponized, we didn't know how. Some believed the child wasn't real, that she was an avatar, an advanced projection of Earth's new evolution. Others believed she was real and that Earth had learned to grow humans into something more than biological entities. Whatever she was, Kira didn't stay. She vanished just like she had arrived. And the Xari, their empire, didn't fall. They emptied it themselves. Released prisoners, shut down their war factories, decommissioned their fleets. Their high commander retired to a monastery and was last seen planting trees with bare hands on a once barren moon. That was the final warning. And the galaxy listened. Real change began, but not because Earth forced us, not through violence, but through something more terrifying. They changed the laws of cause and effect. Old things stopped working. Weapons designed to rupture planetary crusts failed without reason. AI protocols started rejecting violent commands. Starships built for war malfunctioned. The moment they crossed into contested space, it was as if the universe itself had been rewired to reject aggression. Every time we tried to act like the past, reality glitched. Humanity wasn't fighting anymore. They were rewriting the rules. Some called it ascension. Others whispered darker things, that humans had made a bargain with time or cracked something fundamental about existence, that they were no longer playing by our laws of physics, of morality, of meaning. I believed none of those and all of them because something began happening to us, to me. I was born Thune, cold-blooded reptilian, a child of conquest. We were raised on glory and obedience. But I found myself dreaming of oceans, of music, of old Earth cities I'd never seen, never studied, memories that weren't mine. I wasn't the only one. A Z priest woke from a vision claiming he saw a woman in red walking among stars, touching planets and making them remember things long buried. A Draven merchant stopped speaking his own tongue and instead spoke only in English, saying he was remembering too much, too vast. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had become something bigger than themselves. And in doing so, they infected us not with disease but with consciousness. It's hard to explain to anyone who Wasn't there how slow it crept in, how gentle the unraveling felt, like we were waking up from a dream that had lasted too long, one where we were always on top, always the rulers, always right. And now we weren't even sure we were real, because the more we remembered the truth, the more we realized how much of our history had been built on their silence. And now they were speaking, but they weren't using words, they were using the fabric of the universe, and it listened to them, and so did we. We thought it couldn't go any deeper, that Earth had shown us all it could, that it had reached the end of its patience, and now through silence and subtlety was rewriting the galaxy. But what we didn't understand, what none of us could have, was that we had only seen the surface. What lay beneath was older and much stranger. It began with the dreams, not the metaphoric kind, not nightmares brought by guilt or residual trauma. I mean real shared dreams broadcasted across species, synchronized visions among people who'd never met, across star systems that had no connection. I experienced it first on a small moon station near Halxar's belt. I was monitoring communications when I blacked out just for a moment, a blink, no sign of fatigue, no warning, and suddenly I wasn't in the station anymore. I was on Earth, not the scorched, dying Earth we had expected centuries ago. This one was alive. Wild forests stretched across ancient skyscrapers. Rivers of glowing light flowed through ruined cities. I saw people walking, not just humans but Thune like me, Ren, even Sarthians, all living, talking, laughing, farming, singing, not as citizens of Earth, as part of it. The moment felt endless and fleeting at once, like I had always been there and yet had no right to be. When I woke, I found others around me collapsed on the floor, engineers, guards, civilians. Some were weeping, others trembling. Every one of them saw the same thing. Not a simulation, a memory not ours. The galaxy called them the seed visions. They spread fast. Entire space stations reported mass blackouts, battleships halted mid-flight, cargo vessels drifted through open space, their crews dreaming of Earth soil, Earth skies, Earth's people, even those who had never encountered humans before, species in the far-off Nibari clusters where human contact had been minimal. They dreamed too, same scenes, same feelings. That's when a frightening theory began to emerge. Earth had not just rewritten laws, they had planted something in us, a piece of themselves. No one could agree on how. Some claimed it was biological, a dormant gene activated by exposure to their presence. Others insisted it was metaphysical, that humanity had evolved into something more, into a force that could bend thought, emotion, and maybe even time. But the message behind the dreams was always the same: we are not apart, we are the memory you forgot. That phrase echoed through minds like scripture. It wasn't revenge anymore. It wasn't war. It was something more intimate, terrifying in its closeness, because it meant that humanity had stopped viewing itself as a species. They saw themselves as a thread woven into everything, and we were all walking in clothes they had once worn. That truth began to fracture us. Empires broke apart, not through violence but through awakening. The Zetheran Triad, one of the oldest religious collectives in the Spiral Reach, abandoned its 3,000-year-old god structure overnight. Their high priest walked into the sea and declared, I saw her eyes, the human girl. She remembered me before I was born. He drowned himself in his Followers cheered because they believed. He had returned to Earth through the water. The Hilary sovereignty split down. The middle half of its people demanded unification with Earth, not alliance. Assimilation. They wanted to become human, or at least what humanity had become. The other half resisted and tried to re-establish military control. Their weapons failed every time. Ships refused to lock onto Earth coordinates. Engines shut down when programmed for aggression. Entire fleets vanished. Jump, not exploded, not destroyed, just gone like Century 4, gone without violence, gone without even the satisfaction of retaliation. That was Earth's most terrifying weapon. Invisibility with purpose. The idea that they didn't need to strike you down. They could simply remove you from the equation gently, completely, and without a trace, like a god that didn't punish sin. It erased the sinner. Back on my home world, the Thuren were crumbling. Our leaders had once built monuments to conquest, histories engraved into the bones of extinct species. But now those bones began to speak, not literally but through us, through sudden knowledge, through sudden empathy, through dreams of moments we never lived. I remembered holding a human child's hand as bombs fell from the sky. I remembered dying in a pit on Mars, surrounded by the scent of ash. I remembered being human in a past I never lived. Others experienced the same. We began to call it the fold. The slow, inevitable collapse of what we thought was identity. Because Earth didn't just plant memories in us, it made us question if we were ever only ourselves to begin with. Even the high table was affected. Their chambers, once protected by antipsionic fields and energy domes, became quiet. Their transmissions grew delayed. Their messages came with fragmented language, sometimes slipping into old Earth dialects. One ambassador from the Zexar Voidborn began speaking entirely in forgotten human poetry. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons, he muttered. Once during a trade negotiation, we are the hollow men. They locked him away. He dissolved into mist 3 days later. No body, no trace, only a small mark left on the wall where he disappeared. 6 lines scrolled in rust. We do not end with a bang. We return home in whispers. Earth hadn't come to conquer us. It had come to reclaim something, pieces of itself scattered through the stars, through us. And as the fold deepened, a question began to circulate in every corner of the galaxy, whispered in fear, and all alike. Were we all once human? The idea sounded mad, but after everything, was it? What if humanity hadn't vanished into silence? What if it had spread too far? What if the reason their colonies had been wiped, their history buried, their memory erased, was because the empires realized too late that Earth wasn't a planet of people. It was the origin of everyone, and the silence had been a waiting room. Now the time had come, not for vengeance but for reunification. The dreams never stopped. By now they weren't interruptions. They were part of waking life, woven in like muscle memory or instinct. You'd be flying a shuttle, calculating coordinates, and suddenly fragment would hit you, a flash of a face you'd never seen, a smell, a song, a voice calling your name in a language you didn't understand, but your heart answered like it had been waiting. It didn't matter what species you were, insectoid, crystalline, machine-born. Everyone was seeing them. We weren't going mad. We were remembering, or maybe we were becoming what we were always meant to be. Some civilizations embraced it, entire. Worlds dropped their defenses, opened their borders, and called it the Great Realignment. They welcomed the visions, they let go of the old stories, the ones that painted humans as violent, chaotic. Lesser, they looked inward and found pieces of Earth inside themselves. Others weren't so ready. The Zoltecs' hegemony, for example, collapsed under paranoia. They believed the visions were mental infections, an invasive form of psychic warfare. They quarantined their population, tried to isolate and cleanse the infected. By the end of the month, half their planets had gone completely quiet, not destroyed, just silent. Cities still stood, machines still ran, but no voices came back, no signs of resistance or war, like they had simply stepped out of existence. One Zoltek's general, one of the few who escaped, broadcast a message while drifting in a life pod. She stood in front of me, he whispered. Eyes empty, she held out her hand. I didn't take it, now I'm alone. That was the terrifying part. The humans weren't hunting us, they were offering us something, and we didn't understand it. What made them truly unstoppable was not their technology or even their evolution, it was that they weren't playing the same game anymore. While we looked for weapons and strategies, they were moving in meaning, in emotion, connection. They weren't here to win. They were here to restore something we had spent thousands of years destroying. Belonging, and it made many of us crumble. The most powerful empires, those built on control, domination, hierarchy, couldn't survive in a world where the deepest power was vulnerability, where empathy was more dangerous than a fleet, where knowing someone else's pain gave them power over you. But the smaller ones, they thrived. I visited one of those worlds. It was called Nithra, a small moon colony on the edge of the cleft systems. Barely a million people lived there, hybrids, refugees, former slaves from broken empires. They had no armies, no defenses, but when I arrived, the place was glowing, not with power grids or neon tech, with light, natural, alive. The people there had embraced the fold fully. They built homes with their hands, not automation. They spoke a mix of languages, galactic tongues, Earth dialects, things that had been dead for centuries, but they understood each other. And at the center of their settlement was a garden, not a replica or synthetic habitat, a real one with earth soil brought from somewhere no one could explain. They didn't worship humanity, they remembered it, they felt it. They told me something I couldn't forget. They didn't return to conquer us. They returned because they couldn't bear to be forgot. That changed me. I was born Tharan, bred to lead invasions, raised to believe strength meant silence, that emotions were distractions, that war was progress. But sitting in that garden, listening to a Hari child sing a lullaby in English, while a Sarthian monk wept in joy beside her, I felt something inside me split open, and from it came not guilt, not shame, but grief. Grief for what we took from them, grief for what we lost in doing so, grief for the parts of ourselves that had been ripped out and replaced with steel, code, obedience. That night I dreamed again, but this time it wasn't war or fire, it was earth, real and whole, a field of wild flowers stretched to the horizon. A human woman sat beneath a tree, her hands in the dirt, planting something. When she looked at me, I felt every generation of pain carried in her gaze. Not angry, not vengeful, tired. I Remember you, she said. I waited, I woke. With tears in my eyes, my first tears. The run don't cry, not physically. Not biologically, but I did, so did. Others, and across the galaxy millions of us began doing what no empire ever prepared for. We changed, the fold became permanent. It wasn't just dreams anymore. It was DNA, behavior, language, art, music, the very fabric of how we existed. Empires dismantled their fleets. Without a shot, former slave species walked into the capitals of their oppressors and sat down to share stories. Machines once built for extermination started crafting sculptures with fingers they had never used for anything but killing, not because Earth demanded it, but because Earth had planted the memory of a better way. And it was spreading. A new alliance formed, not forged by treaties or trade, but by shared vision. They called it the collective memory. It wasn't ruled, it had no center, it wasn't even official. It just was. 1,000 species, one language, understanding, and at its heart always was Earth, still silent, still untouched, still watching until the final message came. It appeared in every system at once. No ship, no transmission, just one phrase etched into stone, burned into skies, carved. Ice whispered in wind, you are ready. No explanation, no instructions, just that. And for the first time in galactic history, we understood without needing to ask. We were ready to remember everything, not just the horror, not just the blood, but the hope. And the humans, they didn't descend from the heavens or return with light. They walked among us, not as gods, not as saviors, as us, because maybe that's what they'd always been, and we were just finally catching up. When the message arrived, you are ready, something shifted in the bones of the universe. Not metaphorically, literally. The star charts realigned themselves. Roots that had never been stable became smooth. Wormholes that spat ships into nothingness stabilized, opened, and waited. Even time itself, measured by the ancient pulsar beacons, began to slow around the solar system. It wasn't just Earth calling us anymore. It was the universe making room. We didn't know what that meant, not at first, but when the charts settled, they pointed to one place, the ecliptic gate, a dead corridor just outside the Sol system, once thought to be a collapsed supernova field. No one had entered it in thousands of years, even before Earth went silent. The gate was feared, ships went in, none came back, but now it pulsed with light. Warm, gentle, rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. That's where we were meant to go, not just diplomats or soldiers this time. Everyone, every species received the same instruction. Through the dreams, bring your memory. Not technology, not weapons, not apologies, memory. Some took that to mean stories, oral histories, recordings of what had been lost. Others believed it was a personal request. Bring the you that existed before war twisted you. Some brought nothing at all, just themselves. And so they came, ships filled with civilians, elders, children, even creatures with no language, but whose eyes had changed color since the fold began. Over 5,000 vessels from 100 civilizations, all orbiting the ecliptic gate, waiting. Earth said nothing, and then it opened. No flare, no tremor, just space peeling away like curtain fabric, revealing a corridor of light. Not a tunnel, not a wormhole, a path. Alive, the ships moved forward, pulled gently, as if they'd already been inside all along. I was there aboard the Yalin Thor, one of the old Thuran knowledge Carriers now stripped of its war equipment. We were 30 strong. None of us warriors. Anymore, just witnesses. I remember the moment we crossed. The stars blinked out and in their place. Memories, they surrounded us like galaxies suspended in light, not recordings, not simulations, real events. Unspooled around our ship in perfect clarity, I saw my own past, a childhood long buried. I saw the day my father struck me for refusing to recite the creed of strength. I saw myself in the mines of Virex, standing over human prisoner and doing nothing as he was beaten, but then it changed. The memory kept going past what I remembered. I saw the prisoner years later, surviving, building, teaching others, his face older, wiser. I saw him holding a child with scales like mine. I saw what could have been. That's when I understood this was Earth's gift, not a punishment, a choice. The gate was a place between places where truth lived. And what it showed was not only what we had done, it showed what we could still become. Others saw different things. Sarthian diplomat collapsed in tears after seeing a battlefield sheet orchestrated only to watch her victims become future leaders of peace settlements. A sentient cloud being from the Carax cluster began speaking for the first time in eons, reciting Earth poetry with no known source. Some couldn't take it. A few ships turned back, but most continued, because what waited at the end of the corridor wasn't Earth, it was origin. No one can fully describe it. It wasn't a planet, not even a construct. It was a convergence, an ancient nexus where all life began, where the DNA of every species overlapped, twisted, and unfolded in ways no science could trace. It wasn't Earth in the literal sense. It was the idea of Earth, and somehow, impossibly, it had always been there. Buried beneath stars, time, war, ego, memory waiting to be remembered. When we landed, the air smelled like stories. We didn't see humans waiting for us. We saw ourselves, versions of ourselves we had forgotten, versions we had buried beneath conquest, expansion, fear. The grass beneath our feet didn't bend to pressure. It pulsed gently like a nervous system alive with thought. And the trees, they whispered in every language, including ones we didn't know we had once spoken. We didn't walk, we were guided, not by hands, not by voice, by recognition, by remembrance. We passed structures built from memory itself, buildings that changed form as we approached, reflecting our pasts and futures in their shape. I saw one that mirrored the house I had dreamed of as a child, a home that never existed, but I had longed for with every bone in my body. Another delegate, a crystalline being from the glass moon, stood before a structure that morphed into a womb of light, its people's original birthplace. Long destroyed, it glowed in there. Colors sang in their pulse. We didn't speak, no one needed to. Everything we had ever wanted to say lived in the world itself. And then we reached the center there, in a grove older than planets. We found them, the first memory. Not people, not gods, just shapes of light forming and unforming like breath. Each shape felt like someone, a mother, a friend, a lover, an enemy, a version of you, but better, worse, whole, shattered all at once. And they spoke not in sound, in understanding. You are not visitors, they told us. You are pieces returning to the whole. One brave child stepped forward, a hybrid born from 3 species, none of which should have been compatible. She asked the question we were all afraid to say, "Are we human?" And the first memory answered, "You are what we chose to remember." And what chose to remember us, it didn't mean blood, it didn't mean earth or language or even biology. It meant connection. It meant that humanity had never been just a species. It had been a seed planted in every corner of the universe, a potential, and now that potential had returned to bloom, not as domination, not as vengeance, but as wholeness, as oneness. One by one we stepped forward, offered our stories, not grand histories, personal truths. I told them about the man I let die in the Vrex mines. They didn't judge, they listened, and as they did, the memory changed. I saw that man rise again in another life on another world, helping others. His story hadn't ended with my silence, it had continued through me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about fixing the past, this was about taking responsibility for what we pass forward. We left that grove changed, not because they gave us power, but because they gave us ourselves, the version we had abandoned long ago. When we returned to our ships, the stars were different, not literally, but in how they felt. They no longer looked cold, distant, they looked close, familiar, like home, because now Earth wasn't a place, it was a possibility. And it lived inside each of us. We returned from the grove, changed not in body, not in title or species or name, but in something deeper, the part of us that no longer questioned whether we belonged to something greater. It was no longer about Earth, it wasn't even about humanity, it was about the story that had been buried under wars, systems, flags, and fear, the story of us. For so long we believed the galaxy worked by power, that stars were ruled, not shared, that empires defined truth, that weakness was vulnerability, and emotion was noise. But the moment we crossed the threshold of the origin, when we saw not gods, not warriors, but remembered selves, we understood what the humans had become. They weren't here to conquer or to claim revenge. They had returned to finish the sentence we had erased. And now the final word was being written across the galaxy. Transformation was immediate. Some called it evolution, others awakening. There were no ceremonies, no mass broadcasts or declarations, no rules were issued from Earth or whatever Earth had become. But the feeling spread the same way wind moves through grass or light catches on water. Entire governments dissolved peacefully, entire military complexes abandoned, no fighting, no struggle. Soldiers laid down their weapons, not because they were forced to, but because suddenly they no longer made sense. A fleet once feared for its black hole missiles disbanded and became an interstellar rescue collective, a planet that once mined human prisoners to death restructured itself into a healing sanctuary, and perhaps strangest of all, the species that had resisted the longest, the Zari, who once believed the fold was a psychic virus, opened their borders and invited humans to come teach them, not rule, teach. They arrived quietly, no fleets, no ceremony, just individuals, one at a time, stepping off ships in old clothes, worn faces, soft voices. They didn't demand apologies. They didn't ask for compensation. They didn't even mention what had been done to them. They simply said, "We're here to help you remember who you were." It wasn't magic, it wasn't a miracle, it was presence. It was a kind of strength that didn't command obedience, it invited reflection. And that was far more dangerous to the old order than any fleet or weapon ever. Was because it made people choose to leave the past behind. It made people want something better, not just for themselves but for everyone. I spent my last years on a world that had no name. It wasn't on any map because it wasn't a location, not in the usual sense. We called it the threshold. It was a place between stars, between choices, between identities. People came there to sit in silence, to listen, to dream, and every so often a human would arrive, not with answers but with questions, and I remember the last one who came to see me. He looked young, but he spoke like time had folded inside him. He asked me nothing about war, nothing about guilt, nothing about politics. He just sat beside me on the cliff where I always watched the sun rise, and he said, "Do you remember your first kindness? Not the first time I killed, not the first time I disobeyed, not the first time I suffered, but the first time I was kind." The question broke me open like a star going nova, because I did remember. I was 6, still a hatchling. I'd found a wounded animal behind our dwelling, a small, terrified thing that trembled at every sound. I had no reason to spare it. My training said to end its life quickly, a lesson in efficiency, but I didn't. I fed it, protected it, I named it. It died 2 days later, but I remember holding it as it passed. I remember whispering words to calm it, words I didn't understand, but somehow knew. The human smiled when I told him that. Then he reached out, not to touch me, to hold my memory with me, and in that moment I understood what the fold had really been. It wasn't invasion, it was a reminder. The fold had always lived inside us, waiting, growing in silence. Every time we resisted cruelty, every time we told the truth, every time we felt another being's pain, every time we chose kindness instead of survival. Earth hadn't changed the universe. We just needed to remember how. And now the humans were showing us how to return, not to Earth but to ourselves. The official closing of the galactic age of conflict came 50 cycles after the first memory was rediscovered. There was no celebration, no feast, no victory speech, just silence. And then one universal change. Every species agreed to abandon war as a concept, not because they were forced to, but because they no longer needed it. The technology remained, the weapons still existed, but untouched. The memory of what had once been done was not erased, but recontextualized. In every major world there was now a hall of remembrance, a place where the story of humanity and the great silence was told, not with shame but with care. And in every hall one phrase was etched above the entrance. We were warned. We listened too late, but we remembered. Time, the elders, those who once ruled in fear and silence, never returned. Their absence was never explained, but we understood. They hadn't vanished. They had gone ahead into whatever came after remembering. And as for Earth, it remained still, quiet, a star that no longer needed to shine bright to be felt. Some say it still exists in the physical, others believe it has become something else entirely, not a planet, not even a memory, but a pulse at the heart of everything, a reminder alive, every species, that we are capable of becoming more than what we were built to be, and that we are never truly alone. Because humanity, real humanity, lives in the choices we make when no one is watching, when we choose to remember instead of forget, to build instead of Burn to speak instead of conquer, to be soft even when we were made for violence. That is what they became, and that is what they gave back to us. Not control, not justice, the chance to become whole. The elders cautioned, never provoke the humanity, and they were right, because humanity was never just a species. It was the memory of a better world, and now it lives in all of